The sun cast long, bloody shadows across the plains of Arizona Territory as Levi Westwood rode into town, his face etched with pain, his hand pressed firmly against his side. The year was 1874, and San Bernardino was nothing more than a dusty outpost, a collection of weathered buildings that seemed to be perpetually fighting against the wind and the wilderness that threatened to reclaim them. Dust kicked up under the hooves of Levi's chestnut mare as he pulled to a stop outside the general store. Every breath sent shards of agony through his chest. The fight with those rustlers 3 days back had left him with more than just wounded pride. A cracked rib made each inhale a fresh torment. He slid from his saddle, unable to suppress a groan as his boots hit the ground. The world swam before his eyes, the wooden storefront and hitching post blurring into a brown haze. Levi knew he was in trouble. 3 days of riding with an injury like this hadn't done him any favors. "You look like death warmed over, stranger." A woman's voice cut through his pain. Levi squinted up at the source. She stood on the porch of the store, a basket hooked over her arm, her dark hair pulled back in a practical knot at the nape of her neck. Her dress was simple but clean, the kind worn by a woman who worked for a living but took pride in her appearance. "Just need some supplies," he managed, trying to straighten up and immediately regretting it. The woman stepped closer, her eyes a startling shade of green narrowing as she assessed him. "You need a doctor is what you need." "Don't believe in doctors," Levi muttered, tying his horse to the post with hands that had begun to tremble. "And I don't believe in fools dying on my doorstep," she replied, setting her basket down. "I'm Willow Reed. I run the apothecary at the edge of town." "Levi Westwood," he replied, touching the brim of his hat out of habit, wincing at the movement. "And I ain't dying. Tell that to your face." Her voice was matter-of-fact, but there was kindness in it too. She reached out, steadying him as he swayed. "Come on. My shop's just down the street." Levi wanted to protest, but the pain was making it hard to think. He'd been on his own since he was 16, drifting from ranch to ranch across 3 territories, never staying long enough to put down roots. Accepting help didn't come naturally. "It hurts," he whispered, the admission escaping before he could stop it. Willow's expression softened. "Then let me hold you till it doesn't," she said, sliding her arm around his waist, careful to avoid the spot he'd been favoring. The contact was startling. It had been years since anyone had touched him with gentleness. Something about her steady presence made him relent. He leaned against her, just enough to take the pressure off his injury, and allowed her to guide him down the street. Willow's apothecary was a small building with herbs hanging from the rafters and shelves lined with bottles of all shapes and sizes. It smelled of lavender and sage, with undertones of other plants he couldn't name. The space was cool and dim after the harsh sunlight outside. "Sit," she instructed, pointing to a chair by a small table. Levi obeyed, his body making the decision for him. Willow busied herself gathering supplies, her movements efficient and purposeful. "How'd it happen?" she asked, setting down a bowl of water and strips of clean cloth. "Rustlers," he replied simply. 3 of them tried to make off with cattle from the R ranch. I was riding night watch." "And they left you with a cracked rib." She raised an eyebrow, dampening one of the cloths. "They left with more than that," Levi said, a hint of satisfaction in his voice despite the pain. "One of them's got a bullet in his shoulder. Another won't be sitting a saddle comfortably for a while." "Take off your shirt," Willow instructed, all business. Levi hesitated, then began unbuttoning his shirt with clumsy fingers. Willow helped him ease it off, her touch professional but gentle. An angry purple bruise spread across his right side. "Definitely cracked," she confirmed after a careful examination. "Maybe 2. You're lucky they didn't puncture a lung riding for days like this. Luck's never been my strong suit, Levi muttered. Willow ignored the comment, instead reaching for a jar on a nearby shelf. This is going to smell awful and sting worse, but it'll help with the pain and swelling. The salve was cold against his skin, and true to her word, it stung like fire before spreading a blessed numbness. Her fingers worked with practiced skill, spreading the mixture over his bruised ribs. "You've done this before," he observed. "Too many times," she replied. "Men in these parts seem to have a talent for getting themselves hurt." She began wrapping his torso with long strips of cloth, binding his ribs. "This will help stabilize them while they heal, but you need rest. Real rest, not bouncing on a horse chasing outlaws." "Can't afford to rest," Levi said. "Those rustlers are still out there." "You can't afford not to," Willow countered, tying off the bandage. "Another day riding like this and you might end up with a punctured lung or worse." Their eyes met, and for the first time since entering the apothecary, Levi truly looked at her. Willow Reed was younger than he'd initially thought, perhaps 25 or 26 to his 30 years. There was a quiet strength in her face, and those remarkable green eyes held a depth of knowledge that suggested she'd seen her share of hardship. "I've got a room upstairs," she said, breaking the silence. "You can stay there until you're fit to ride again." "I can't impose, it's not an imposition if I'm offering," she cut him off. "Besides, I've invested too much time in patching you up to have you undo all my work." A smile tugged at Levi's lips despite himself. "You always this stubborn with strangers." "Only the ones fool enough to argue with their healer," she replied, a hint of a smile playing on her own lips. For the first time in days, Levi felt the tension in his shoulders ease slightly. Perhaps a day or two of rest wouldn't be the worst idea. The rustlers weren't going to disappear, and he'd be of no use to anyone if he collapsed in the middle of the desert. "One night," he conceded. "I'll be on my way tomorrow." Willow's expression told him she doubted that very much, but she simply nodded. "Can you make it up the stairs, or do you need help?" Pride made him want to refuse assistance, but wisdom prevailed. "Might need a shoulder," he admitted. Together, they made their way up the narrow staircase to a small but tidy bedroom. A simple iron bed with a patchwork quilt stood against one wall, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl against another. A window looked out over the back of the property, where Levi could see a small garden surrounded by a rough wooden fence. "It's not fancy, but it's clean," Willow said, helping him to sit on the edge of the bed. "It's more than I deserve," Levi replied honestly. "Thank you, Miss Reed." "Willow," she corrected him. "Get some rest, Mr. Westwood. I'll bring up some broth later." "Levi," he returned, watching as she nodded and left the room. Alone, Levi eased himself back on the bed, careful of his bandaged ribs. The salve had dulled the worst of the pain, and the binding gave him a measure of relief. He couldn't remember the last time he'd slept in a proper bed or been shown such kindness by a stranger. His eyes grew heavy as exhaustion overcame him. His last thought before sleep claimed him was of green eyes and gentle hands. Levi woke to the sound of soft footsteps and the scent of something savory. Opening his eyes, he found the room bathed in the golden light of late afternoon. Willow stood by the bed, a tray in her hands. "You've been asleep for hours," she said by way of greeting. "Thought you might be hungry." Levi realized he was ravenous. He hadn't had a proper meal since before the fight with the rustlers. With Willow's help, he managed to sit up against the headboard, wincing as his ribs protested. The tray held a bowl of beef and vegetable broth, a thick slice of bread, and a cup of something steaming that wasn't coffee. "Willow tea," she explained, seeing his questioning look. "It'll help with the pain and inflammation." Levi took a spoonful of the broth, surprised by how flavorful it was. "This is good," he said after a moment. "Real good." "Don't sound so shocked," Willow replied with a small smile. "I may spend my days mixing medicines, but I can still cook." "Most women I know can't do either particularly well," Levi admitted. "Then you've been keeping poor company," she said, arranging the pillows behind him to make him more comfortable. "How's the pain?" "Manageable," he answered, which wasn't exactly a lie. It still hurt like blazes, but it was better than it had been. Willow gave him a look that suggested she didn't entirely believe him but didn't press the issue. "I've brought your saddlebags up from your horse. She's been fed and watered in the small stable out back." "You didn't have to do that," Levi said, genuine gratitude in his voice. "It wasn't any trouble. She's a beautiful animal." "Penny's been with me for 5 years now," Levi said, a note of pride in his voice. "Best horse I've ever had." "She seems sweet-tempered," Willow observed, sitting in a chair by the window. "Unlike some I could mention." Levi chuckled, then immediately regretted it as pain shot through his side. "I deserved that," he admitted, taking a sip of the willow tea. It was bitter but not unpleasant. "So, Mr. Westwood Levi," Willow corrected herself. "What brings you to San Bernardino besides chasing rustlers?" Levi considered the question as he ate more of the broth. "Work, mostly. I've been hiring on at ranches across Arizona territory for the past few years. Was at the Triple R for about 4 months before this happened. And before Arizona, Texas, New Mexico before that, California for a spell." He shrugged, then winced. "I go where the work is." "No place to call home?" she asked, her voice neutral. "Not for a long time," he replied honestly. "What about you? You don't sound like you're from around here." "I'm not," Willow confirmed. "I came from Boston 5 years ago after my father died. He was a doctor, taught me everything I know about herbs and healing." "That's quite a change, Boston to San Bernardino," she smiled, a distant look in her eyes. "I wanted something different, something real." Boston society had too many rules, too many expectations. Out here, people care more about what you can do than who your family is or how you pour tea. Levi nodded, understanding perfectly. "Freedom's worth a lot." "It is," she agreed. "Though I didn't expect quite this much dust and lawlessness when I first arrived." That drew a laugh from Levi, which he cut short with a hiss of pain. "Sorry to disappoint you, madam, but the West isn't all that romantic as those dime novels make it out to be." "I figured that out around the time I treated my 3rd gunshot wound," Willow said dryly. "Finish your tea. It'll help you sleep." Levi did as instructed, draining the cup before settling back against the pillows. The combination of the meal, the tea, and his still healing body was making him drowsy again. "Thank you," he said softly, "for everything." Willow stood and collected the tray. "Get some rest. I'll check on you in the morning." As she turned to leave, Levi found himself not wanting her to go. It had been a long time since he'd had a conversation that wasn't about cattle or the weather or how much he was getting paid. But exhaustion was pulling him under, and before he could say anything else, sleep claimed him once more. The next morning brought with it a stiffness that made Levi groan as he tried to sit up. His ribs felt like they were on fire, the movement having jarred them despite the binding. He managed to get to his feet, swaying slightly before finding his balance. The pitcher on the washstand had been filled with fresh water. Levi splashed some on his face, the cool liquid helping to clear his head. He'd just finished drying off when a knock came at the door. "Come in," he called, hastily pulling on his shirt but leaving it unbuttoned. Willow entered, carrying another tray. This time it held a plate of eggs and biscuits along with a cup of coffee. The sight and smell made Levi's stomach rumble. "You're up," she observed. "How are you feeling?" "Like I got stomped by a bull," he admitted. "But I'll live." "Sit," she instructed, setting the tray down on a small table. "Let me check your binding before you eat." Levi complied, lowering himself carefully into a chair. Willow's fingers were cool against his skin as she examined the bandages and the bruising beneath them. "The swelling's down," she noted. "That's a good sign, but you're still a long way from healed." "I need to get back to the ranch," Levi argued. "I've already been gone too long." Willow stepped back, crossing her arms. "If you get on a horse today, you'll undo everything we've accomplished." "The Triple R will still be there in a few days. The foreman will understand that you're injured," she interrupted. "I can send word with one of the local boys if you're concerned." Levi sighed, knowing she was right but not liking it. "Fine. One more day, 3, Willow countered. "At minimum." They stared at each other, a battle of wills that Levi suspected he would lose. There was something about Willow Reed that suggested she wasn't accustomed to giving ground when she believed she was right. 2, he offered, "and I'll rest easy after that." Willow considered this. 2, she agreed, "but only if you're showing real improvement." "Deal," Levi said, turning his attention to the breakfast she'd brought. "This looks mighty fine." "It's just eggs and biscuits," she replied, but he could tell she was pleased by the compliment. "After days of trail rations, this is a feast," he assured her, taking a bite. "You run this place all by yourself," Willow nodded, taking the chair opposite him. "Yes, though I have a young girl who helps with the cleaning and some of the simpler preparations. Maria's mother works at the hotel, and she sends her here a few hours each day." "Must get lonely," Levi observed, watching her closely. A shadow crossed her face there and gone so quickly he almost missed it. "I keep busy," she said. "There's always someone needing a tonic or a poultice, and I grow most of my own herbs. Between that and helping Doc Sullivan when he's overwhelmed, I don't have much time to feel lonely." Levi sensed there was more to the story but didn't press. Everyone was entitled to their secrets. He certainly had his own. Instead, he asked, "You work with the town doctor?" "When needed," Willow confirmed. "He's getting on in years and his hands aren't as steady as they once were. I assist with surgeries and some of the more difficult cases." "A woman doctor," Levi mused. "That's not something you see every day." "I'm not a doctor," she corrected him. "Just a healer, though I did learn from one of the best." "Your father," she nodded. "He believed women could be just as skilled in medicine as men." It wasn't a popular view in Boston society, but he never cared much for what others thought. "Sounds like someone else I'm getting to know," Levi remarked with a small smile. Willow returned the smile, and Levi was struck by how it transformed her face, softening the seriousness that seemed to be her natural expression. "What will you do when you're healed?" she asked. "Go back to the Triple R." Levi considered the question. "For a while, I suppose. I've saved up some money. Been thinking about getting a place of my own eventually. Small spread, nothing fancy. Here in Arizona, maybe." He hadn't really thought about the where, just the what. "Somewhere with good water and decent grazing." "It's not a bad dream," Willow said softly. "What about you?" Levi asked. "Planning to stay in San Bernardino forever?" She looked out the window, her expression thoughtful. "I don't know, I like it here. The people have been good to me for the most part, but sometimes I wonder if there's somewhere else I might belong more." "Belong," Levi repeated the word. "That's a notion I haven't thought about in a long time." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of a shared loneliness, a shared searching for something neither of them could quite name. The moment was broken by the sound of the shop door opening downstairs, followed by a woman's voice calling Willow's name. "I have to go," Willow said, rising from her chair. "That's Mrs. Thornton. Her youngest has a persistent cough." "Go on," Levi urged. "I'm not going anywhere." After she left, Levi finished his breakfast and then, moving carefully, made his way to the window. From there, he could see the main street of San Bernardino. It wasn't a large town, but it was busy enough with wagons and riders passing by, people going about their business. He'd passed through dozens of such towns in his years of drifting, never staying long enough to learn more than the location of the saloon and the general store. But as he watched the life below, he found himself wondering what it might be like to know the names of the shopkeepers, to have people greet him by name as he walked down the street, to have a place where he belonged. It was a dangerous line of thinking for a man who had spent so long avoiding attachments. Yet he couldn't quite shake it, just as he couldn't quite shake the image of green eyes and a rare, transformative smile. True to her word, Willow kept Levi under her watchful eye for 2 full days. He spent most of the time in the small room above the apothecary, though by the 2nd day he was strong enough to make his way downstairs and sit in a chair by the window while Willow worked. He found himself fascinated by her knowledge of herbs and remedies. She could identify dozens of plants by sight and smell, knew exactly how to prepare them for different ailments, and had a seemingly endless supply of patience for the stream of townsfolk who came seeking her help. "How'd you learn all this?" he asked on the afternoon of the 2nd day, watching as she ground something fragrant in a mortar. "Years of practice," she replied without looking up. "My father started teaching me when I was a child. He said I had a gift for it, remembering which plants do what, sensing how much of each to use." She paused, a fond smile crossing her face. "He used to take me foraging in the countryside around Boston. We'd spend whole days just gathering herbs and flowers." "You miss him," Levi observed. Willow nodded. "Every day, but I feel close to him when I'm working. Like he's watching over my shoulder, guiding my hands." "My father was a rancher," Levi said, surprising himself by volunteering the information. "Had a small spread in West Texas. Nothing fancy, but it was ours." "What happened to it?" Willow asked, setting aside her mortar and giving him her full attention. Levi looked down at his hands, rough and calloused from years of hard work. "War came. He went off to fight for the Confederacy, never came back. Then my mother took sick typhoid fever. By the time she was gone, there wasn't much left of the place. I was 16, sold what remained and headed west." "I'm sorry," Willow said softly. "It's hard to lose those you love." "It was a long time ago," Levi replied. Though they both knew that time didn't always heal such wounds, it just made them easier to bear. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the sound of Willow returning to her work, crushing herbs with practiced motions. "I should be ready to ride tomorrow," Levi said after a while. Willow glanced up at him, her expression unreadable. "Your ribs are still healing. You should take it easy even if you do go back." "The foreman will put me on light duties for a while," Levi assured her. "I won't do anything foolish." "That remains to be seen," she said dryly, but there was a hint of a smile on her lips. That evening, Willow brought supper up to his room, a hearty stew with chunks of beef and vegetables, accompanied by cornbread still warm from the oven. They ate together by the light of an oil lamp, the conversation flowing more easily than Levi would have expected. He found himself telling her about his years of drifting, about the characters he'd met and the places he'd seen. She, in turn, shared stories of Boston society and her adjustment to life in the Arizona territory. "The first time I saw a rattlesnake, I nearly fainted," she admitted with a laugh. "Now I keep their venom for certain remedies." "Remind me never to make you angry," Levi joked, earning another of those transformative smiles. As the evening wore on, Levi found himself reluctant for it to end. Tomorrow he would ride back to the Triple R, and this interlude, this unexpected connection, would come to a close. The thought left him with an emptiness he hadn't anticipated. "I should let you rest," Willow said eventually, gathering the dishes onto the tray. if you're determined to leave tomorrow." "I am," Levi confirmed, though with less conviction than he might have expressed a day earlier. "I've imposed on your hospitality long enough." "It wasn't an imposition," she said quietly, not meeting his eyes. Levi stood, moving carefully to avoid jarring his ribs. "Willow," he began, not entirely sure what he wanted to say. She looked up then, and something in her expression made the words catch in his throat. Instead, he reached out and took the tray from her hands, setting it back on the table. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not just for fixing me up, but for everything." Willow nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "You're welcome. It was nice having someone to talk to for a change." "Maybe I could stop by next time I'm in town," Levi suggested, the offer surprising him as much as it seemed to surprise her. "Check in, let you see that your patient is still in one piece." "I'd like that," Willow replied, a smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "Though preferably without any new injuries." "I'll do my best," Levi promised, returning her smile. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with something neither was quite ready to name. Then Willow picked up the tray again. "Good night, Levi," she said softly. "Good night, Willow," he replied, watching as she left the room, closing the door gently behind her. Levi slept poorly that night, his thoughts a jumble of emotions and possibilities. By dawn he was up and dressed, his saddlebags packed and ready. His ribs still ached, but the sharp, stabbing pain had subsided to a dull throb manageable, especially with the tight binding Willow had applied. He made his way downstairs to find Willow already awake, preparing a packet of herbs at her work table. "For the pain," she explained, handing him the small bundle. "Mix it with hot water, drink it morning and night until it's gone." "Thank you," Levi said, tucking the packet into his shirt pocket. "What do I owe you?" "For everything, the room, the food, the doctoring." Willow shook her head. "Nothing, it was my pleasure to help." "I can't accept that," Levi protested. "You've done too much." "Then come back," she said, her voice quiet but firm. "When you're in town next. That'll be payment enough." Levi studied her face, searching for any sign that she was simply being polite. Instead, he found a sincerity that made his heart beat a little faster. "I will," he promised. "You can count on it." Outside, Penny nickered a greeting as Levi approached the small stable behind the apothecary. She looked well rested and eager to be on the move again. Levi saddled her with care, mindful of his still tender ribs, then led her around to the front of the shop where Willow waited. "The Triple R is a good 2 hours' ride," she said, concern evident in her voice. "Take it slow and rest if you need to." "Yes, madam," Levi replied with a small smile, touching the brim of his hat. "I'll be careful." He mounted up, grimacing slightly as the movement pulled at his side, then looked down at Willow. She stood in the early morning light, her dark hair catching the sun, her green eyes watching him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher, but that warmed him nonetheless. "Until next time," he said, unable to find better words for the moment. "Until next time," she echoed, stepping back as he turned Penny toward the main street. As Levi rode out of San Bernardino, he found himself already calculating how soon he might reasonably return. It was a dangerous feeling, this pull toward a place, toward a person. Yet for the first time in years, the prospect of having something to come back to didn't feel like a burden or a trap. It felt like possibility. The Triple R Ranch spread across a vast expanse of Arizona territory, nestled in a valley with rolling hills to the north, and a river cutting through its eastern boundary. It was good land, as land went in this part of the country, enough water to sustain the cattle and the men who worked them, enough grazing to keep the animals fat and healthy. Levi rode in around midday, the familiar sights and sounds of the ranch a comfort after his days away. Hands called greetings as he made his way to the main house, where he found Frank Reynolds, the foreman, going over ledgers on the porch. "Westwood," Reynolds said, looking up with surprise. "Didn't expect to see you back so soon. Heard you took a bad hit during that rustling business." "Cracked rib," Levi confirmed, dismounting carefully, "but I'm mending." Reynolds eyed him critically. "You don't look like you should be in a saddle yet." "I'm fit enough for light duty," Levi assured him. "Well, we can use you," Reynolds admitted. "Those rustlers hit again 2 nights ago." "Took a dozen head from the north pasture." Levi frowned. "Same group, looks like it. Same method, same direction of travel." The foreman sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. "We're stretched thin as it is. Lost 2 hands to that outfit up near Flagstaff last month, and Jenkins broke his leg last week." "I'll help however I can," Levi offered. Reynolds nodded. "Get yourself settled in. I'll have something for you to do that won't tax those ribs too much." The bunkhouse was quiet when Levi entered, most of the hands out working. He made his way to his bunk, setting down his saddlebags and taking a moment to rest. The ride had taken more out of him than he cared to admit, the pain in his side a constant reminder of his injury. He pulled out the packet of herbs Willow had given him, staring at it thoughtfully. Her face came to mind, those remarkable green eyes, the quiet strength in her manner, the rare but transformative smile. It had been a long time since a woman had occupied his thoughts this way. "Westwood, you're back." Levi looked up to see Thomas Ellis, one of the younger hands, entering the bunkhouse. "Heard you got busted up pretty bad," Ellis continued, crossing to his own bunk. "You okay?" "I'll live," Levi replied, tucking the herbs away. "What I miss?" Ellis filled him in on the goings-on at the ranch, the second rustling incident. A new cook who couldn't make a decent biscuit to save his life. The owner's son coming out from the east to learn the business. "He's a greenhorn if ever I saw one," Ellis said with a grin. "Asked me yesterday if we milk the steers." Levi chuckled, then winced as his ribs protested. "He'll learn. Or get himself killed trying," Ellis replied. "You want some coffee? Cook might not be able to bake, but he makes a decent brew." "Sounds good," Levi said, rising carefully. "Then I better check in with Reynolds, see what he wants me doing." The days fell into a rhythm. Reynolds, true to his word, kept Levi on lighter duties, mending tack, helping in the cookhouse, keeping an eye on the owner's son, Edward, who was indeed as green as grass but eager to learn. As Levi's ribs healed, he gradually took on more responsibilities, though he was careful not to push himself too far. Willow's warnings echoed in his mind, and he found he didn't want to disappoint her by returning to San Bernardino with a worsened injury. At night, he often found himself thinking of the apothecary with its scent of herbs and the woman who worked there with such quiet competence. He wondered what she was doing, if she thought of him at all, if she would be pleased to see him when he eventually returned to town. It was foolishness, he knew. Willow Reed was an educated woman from Boston, refined in ways he could never be. What would she want with a drifting cowhand whose only possessions were his horse, his saddle, and the clothes on his back? Yet he couldn't shake the memory of her voice, the way she'd said, "Then come back." Like it mattered to her. Like he mattered. 3 weeks after his return to the Triple R, Reynolds approached Levi as he was finishing up work in the stables. "Need someone to go into town tomorrow," the foreman said. "Supplies to pick up, mail to collect. You interested?" Levi's heart quickened at the prospect, though he kept his expression neutral. "Sure, I can do that." "Figured you might be ready for a change of scenery," Reynolds said with a knowing look. "Ellis mentioned you've been asking after the apothecary lady." Heat crept up Levi's neck. "She patched me up when I was hurt. Thought I should thank her properly." Reynolds just nodded, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "List'll be ready in the morning. Take the wagon. We've got a fair amount to bring back." That night, Levi found it hard to sleep, anticipation keeping him awake long after the other hands had begun to snore. By dawn, he was up and ready, the wagon hitched and waiting before Reynolds had even finished his first cup of coffee. "Eager, ain't you?" the foreman remarked as he handed over the supply list. Levi ignored the comment, focusing on the paper in his hand. "Anything else you need while I'm there?" "That covers it," Reynolds assured him. "Take your time. No rush getting back." The journey to San Bernardino seemed both longer and shorter than Levi remembered. The anticipation made each mile stretch endlessly. Yet before he knew it, the town was coming into view, the morning sun glinting off windows and rooftops. He attended to the ranch business first, dropping off letters at the post office, arranging for supplies to be loaded at the general store later in the day. With those tasks completed, he found himself standing on the main street, looking toward the apothecary at the edge of town. Nerves he hadn't felt in years churned in his stomach. What if she didn't want to see him? What if she'd forgotten him entirely? It had been nearly a month, after all. She probably had dozens of patients come through her door in that time. Only one way to find out, he told himself, setting off down the street. The bell above the door jingled as Levi entered the apothecary. The familiar scent of herbs and medicines greeted him, bringing back memories of his days recuperating here. The shop was empty of customers, but he could hear movement in the back room. "Be with you in a moment," Willow's voice called out. Levi removed his hat, running a hand through his hair in a futile attempt to tame it. He was suddenly aware of the trail dust on his clothes, the stubble on his jaw that he hadn't bothered to shave that morning. The curtain separating the back room from the shop parted, and there she was. Willow Reed, her dark hair pinned up but with tendrils escaping to frame her face, her practical dress covered by an apron stained with the evidence of her work. She looked tired, he thought, but her eyes, those remarkable green eyes, widened when she saw him, and a smile spread across her face that made his heart skip a beat. "Levi," she said, his name sounding different somehow in her voice. "You came back." "I promised I would," he replied, a smile of his own forming. "How have you been, Willow?" "Busy," she admitted, wiping her hands on her apron. "There's been some sickness going around, nothing serious, just summer colds and such. And your ribs." "Much better," Levi assured her. "That binding you did worked wonders, and the herbs helped with the pain." "I'm glad to hear it," she said, her smile softening. "Are you in town long?" "Just the day," Levi replied, feeling a pang of regret at the admission. "Ranch business. But I wanted to stop by, see how you were doing." Willow nodded, a flicker of what might have been disappointment crossing her face before she masked it with a smile. "Well, I'm glad you did. It's good to see you looking so well." There was an awkward moment of silence, neither quite knowing what to say next. Levi had rehearsed this meeting in his mind countless times on the ride to town, but now all his carefully planned words seemed to have deserted him. "Would you?" Willow began at the same time Levi said. "I was wondering." They both stopped, then laughed, the tension breaking. "You first," Levi insisted. Willow tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture he remembered from his stay at the apothecary. "I was going to ask if you'd like to stay for lunch. It's nothing fancy, just some bread and cheese and cold chicken, but—" "I'd like that very much," Levi said, relief and pleasure flooding through him. "I was about to ask if you might be free to join me for a meal, but your offer sounds much better than the saloon fare." Her smile brightened. "Give me a few minutes to finish what I was doing in the back, and I'll put something together." Levi watched as she disappeared behind the curtain, a warmth spreading through him that had nothing to do with the Arizona heat. She hadn't forgotten him. She was glad to see him. And she wanted to spend time with him. It was more than he'd dared to hope for. Lunch was served at the small table in Willow's living quarters behind the shop. The space was cozy and feminine without being fussy, a comfortable settee with a patchwork quilt, shelves lined with books, dried flowers hanging from the ceiling beams alongside the herbs. "This is nice," Levi commented, looking around. "Feels like a home." "I've tried to make it one," Willow replied, setting plates on the table. "It's not Boston, but I've grown to love it." The meal was simple but delicious, and the conversation flowed easily between them. Levi told her about his work at the Triple R, about the ongoing trouble with rustlers, about the owner's son and his steep learning curve. Willow shared stories of her patients, the progress of her herb garden, the latest letter from an old friend in Boston. "She's getting married in the fall," Willow said, a wistful note in her voice. "Invited me to come back for the wedding, but I don't think I can manage the trip." "You miss it," Levi observed. "Boston, I mean." Willow considered this, her head tilted thoughtfully. "I miss certain aspects of it. The culture, the bookshops, some of the people. But I don't miss the constraints, the endless social obligations, the feeling that I was always being judged and found wanting because I preferred my father's medical books to dancing at balls." "Can't say I've ever been to a ball," Levi admitted with a smile. "Might be interesting to see." "You'd hate it," Willow assured him with a laugh. "All those rules about who can speak to whom and when, the proper way to ask for a dance, the correct fork to use for each course at dinner." "Sounds like a minefield," Levi agreed. "I'll stick to barn dances where the only rule is to keep your boots off your partner's toes." Their eyes met across the table, and something passed between them, a recognition, perhaps, of how different their backgrounds were, yet how comfortable they felt in each other's company despite those differences. "Will you come back again?" Willow asked suddenly, her directness catching Levi off guard. "To San Bernardino, I mean." He studied her face, trying to read what lay behind the question. "Would you like me to?" "Yes," she said simply, honestly. "I would." Levi reached across the table, taking her hand in his. Her skin was soft despite the work she did, her fingers slender and capable. "Then I will," he promised. "As often as I can." Willow's smile was like sunshine breaking through clouds, and in that moment, Levi knew he was in trouble. This woman was becoming important to him in a way no one had been for a very long time. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. The rest of the afternoon passed too quickly. Levi helped Willow with some of the heavier work around the apothecary, moving barrels of dried herbs, fixing a loose board on the back steps, retrieving items from high shelves. They worked together comfortably, as if they'd been doing so for years rather than hours. "I should get back to the ranch," Levi said reluctantly as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. "The supplies should be ready at the general store by now." Willow nodded, disappointment evident in her expression despite her attempt to hide it. "Of course, you have responsibilities." "But I'll be back," he assured her, taking her hands in his. "Soon." "I'll hold you to that," she replied, squeezing his hands gently. Impulsively, Levi leaned down and pressed a kiss to her cheek. "Thank you for lunch," he said softly, "and for the company." Willow's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't pull away. "You're welcome. Anytime." As Levi drove the loaded wagon back to the Triple R that evening, the memory of that kiss and the promise of seeing Willow again kept a smile on his face despite the long road ahead. For the first time in years, he had someone to look forward to beyond the next job, the next paycheck, the next town. It was a dangerous feeling for a drifter, but one he was increasingly unwilling to ignore. Over the next few months, Levi found every excuse he could to make the trip into San Bernardino. Sometimes it was legitimate ranch business, supplies to collect, messages to deliver. Other times, He simply took a day of his own time, riding into town with no purpose other than to see Willow. Each visit deepened the connection between them. They shared meals and conversations, walks along the edge of town as the summer heat gave way to the milder temperatures of fall. Levi learned about Willow's life in Boston, about her father, the doctor, and her mother who had died when Willow was just a girl. Willow, in turn, heard stories of Levi's childhood on the small Texas ranch, of the lessons his father had taught him about horses and cattle, of the years of drifting after the war took everything he had known. "Have you ever thought of going back?" Willow asked one evening as they sat on the porch behind the apothecary, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple. "To Texas, I mean." Levi considered the question, swirling the coffee in his cup. "Sometimes," he admitted, "but there's nothing left for me there. The land was sold, the house gone, and the memories. Some are good, but many aren't." Willow nodded, understanding in her eyes. "I feel the same way about Boston sometimes. It's where I grew up, but it's not home anymore." "And is San Bernardino home?" Levi asked, watching her closely. She looked out at the horizon, thoughtful. "It's becoming so," she said after a moment. "More than I expected when I first arrived." What she didn't say, what hung in the air between them, was that his presence in her life was part of that feeling. Levi could sense it, just as he could sense his own growing attachment to this place, to her, with each visit. But obstacles remained. Levi was still a ranch hand at the Triple R, with no permanent claim to anything or anywhere. Willow had her apothecary, her patients who depended on her, her life that she had carefully built in San Bernardino. And neither of them had spoken openly of feelings that were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. On a cool day in late October, Levi rode into town with news. The owner of the Triple R was selling a small parcel of land, 50 acres with a creek running through it, a modest cabin that needed work but was sound at its core, and enough good grazing for a small herd. "I've put in an offer," Levi told Willow as they walked along the creek that ran at the edge of town. "Used every penny I've saved over the years, but Reynolds thinks the old man will accept it." Willow's eyes widened. "Levi, that's wonderful. Your own spread, just like you talked about." "It's not much," he cautioned. "Nowhere near the size of the Triple R, but it's a start, something of my own." "How far is it from here?" Willow asked, and Levi heard the question beneath the question. "About an hour's ride," he replied, watching her face carefully. "North and east a ways." Relief flickered across her features, quickly masked, but not before Levi caught it. The knowledge that she cared about the distance between them sent a surge of hope through him. "When will you know?" she asked. "Reynolds said he'd have an answer for me by the end of the week." Levi took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "I was hoping. That is, I wondered if you might ride out with me to see it, once it's mine." Willow's smile was answer enough, but her words confirmed it. "I'd like that very much." 3 days later, Levi returned to San Bernardino with the deed to 50 acres of Arizona territory in his pocket, and a future that suddenly seemed full of possibilities. Willow was waiting for him at the apothecary, her face lighting up when he entered, hat in hand, a broad smile on his face. "You got it," she said, reading his expression. "I got it," he confirmed. "It's mine." Without hesitation, Willow crossed the room and embraced him, her arms wrapping around his waist, her face pressed against his chest. Levi returned the embrace, holding her close, breathing in the scent of lavender and sage that he had come to associate with her. "I'm so happy for you," she said, looking up at him with those remarkable green eyes. "Be happy with me," Levi replied softly, the words escaping before he could consider them. "Ride out with me tomorrow to see it, spend the day there. Help me imagine what it could become." Willow nodded, her smile radiant. "Yes, tomorrow." They rode out at dawn, Willow on a gentle mare borrowed from the livery stable, Levi on Penny. The air was crisp with the promise of winter, but the sun was warm as it rose higher in the sky. Levi led the way, following a trail that wound through rolling hills covered in scrub and occasional stands of juniper. "There," he said finally, reining in Penny at the crest of a small rise. "That's it." Below them stretched a modest valley, greener than much of the surrounding land thanks to the creek that cut through it. The cabin stood near a copse of cottonwoods, its weathered logs solid but in need of attention. A small corral adjacent to it was in similar condition, serviceable but requiring work. "Oh, Levi," Willow breathed, taking in the scene. "It's beautiful. It needs work," he cautioned. "Lots of it." "Yes," she agreed, "but it has good bones." "Like a patient who's a bit run down but fundamentally sound." Levi chuckled at the comparison. "Let's hope this patient responds to treatment then." They spent the day exploring the property. Levi showed Willow the creek with its clear, cold water, the meadow where he planned to graze his first small herd, the hilltop with a view that stretched for miles. They examined the cabin, discussing repairs needed to the roof, the fireplace, the windows. "It'll be cozy once it's fixed up," Willow observed, standing in the main room with its stone fireplace and rough-hewn walls. "A real home." Levi watched her as she moved about the space, noting how naturally she seemed to fit there, how right it felt to have her beside him in what would soon be his home. And suddenly, the future he wanted had perhaps wanted for months without fully acknowledging it crystallized in his mind with perfect clarity. "Willow," he said, his voice rougher than he intended, "I need to ask you something." She turned to face him, her expression curious but open. "What is it?" Levi crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "I know we haven't known each other all that long, and I know I'm not the kind of man you probably imagined for yourself. I'm rough around the edges, with not much to my name but this land and my horse. But these past few months, getting to know you, being with you, it's changed everything for me." Willow's eyes widened as she realized where his words were leading, but she didn't pull away, didn't stop him. "I love you, Willow Reed," Levi continued, the words flowing now that he had started. "I love your strength and your kindness, your healing hands and your remarkable mind. And I'm asking, hoping that you might consider a future here with me. Not right away," he added hastily. "I know you have your apothecary, your patients who depend on you. But someday, when the cabin's fixed up proper, when there's a garden for your herbs and shelves for your books." He trailed off, suddenly uncertain, watching her face for any sign of how she was receiving his words. Tears welled in Willow's eyes, and for a terrible moment, Levi thought he had misread everything, that he had ruined the friendship they had built. But then she smiled, a radiant, joyful smile that made his heart soar. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes to all of it, Levi Westwood. Yes to someday, and yes to a future here. Because I love you too in a way I never expected to love anyone." Levi pulled her into his arms then, holding her close as if afraid she might vanish. When their lips met, it was a kiss filled with promise and possibility, with the certainty that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The winter brought its own challenges. Levi divided his time between work at the Triple R, where he continued to earn a wage, and improvements to his own property. The cabin roof was his first priority, replacing damaged shingles before the winter rains, and occasional snows made such work impossible. Then came the windows, the fireplace, the corral fencing. Willow visited when she could, bringing supplies and lending a hand with the work. She started a small herb garden near the cabin, planning for the larger one she would establish in the spring. They talked about the future, about the herd Levi would start with the money he was saving, about how Willow might continue her healing work from the ranch, about the life they would build together. But the winter also brought trouble. The rustlers who had plagued the Triple R became bolder, striking ranches throughout the area. In early December, they hit a spread near Levi's property, making off with a dozen head and burning a barn in the process. "Reynolds is organizing a posse," Levi told Willow during one of his visits to the apothecary. "The sheriff's joining us. We're going after them, try to put an end to this once and for all." Worry creased Willow's brow. "When?" "Tomorrow at dawn," Levi replied, wishing he could ease the concern in her eyes. "We've got a good idea where their camp is, up in the hills to the north. With luck, we'll catch them by surprise." "And if you don't?" Willow asked softly. Levi had no answer for that. They both knew the risks. Rustlers were desperate men, often willing to kill to protect their ill-gotten gains. "Be careful," she said finally, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "Remember you have something to come back to now." "I'll remember," he promised, turning his head to press a kiss to her palm. "This will all be over soon, and then we can focus on the future. Our future." The posse set out at first light the next morning, 8 men in all, led by Sheriff Taylor and Frank Reynolds. The trail was clear, the rustlers having grown careless in their success. They followed it into the hills, the terrain growing rougher as they ascended, the air colder among the pines and junipers that dotted the slopes. By mid-afternoon, they had found the camp, a hidden canyon with a natural spring, 3 crude shelters built against the rock face, and a makeshift corral holding cattle bearing the brands of various ranches in the area. 6 men, the sheriff observed from their vantage point above the canyon. "Heavily armed from the looks of it. Element of surprise is on our side," Reynolds said. "We take positions around the canyon, close in at my signal." The plan was straightforward: surround the rustlers, call for their surrender, and if they resisted, be prepared for a fight. Levi took his position behind a boulder near the canyon entrance, rifle ready, heart pounding in his chest. He thought of Willow, of the cabin they were making into a home, of the life that awaited them if he survived this day. Reynolds's signal, a sharp whistle, cut through the canyon. The sheriff stood, rifle raised. "This is Sheriff Taylor," he called out. "You're surrounded. Throw down your weapons and come out with your hands up." For a moment there was silence. Then all hell broke loose. The rustlers scattered, diving for cover, guns blazing. The posse returned fire, the canyon echoing with the crack of rifles and the shouts of men. Levi saw one of the rustlers making for the horses tethered near the spring. He took aim, fired, and saw the man fall. Another rustler was moving along the canyon wall, trying to flank them. Levi tracked him, waiting for a clear shot. It happened in an instant. Levi felt the bullet before he heard the shot, a searing pain in his left side that knocked the breath from his lungs and sent him stumbling backward. He landed hard, his rifle clattering away, pain radiating through his torso. His hand came away red when he pressed it to his side. Around him, the gunfight continued, but the sound seemed distant, muffled. Levi dragged himself behind the boulder, pressing both hands to the wound in a desperate attempt to slow the bleeding. His vision blurred, darkness creeping in at the edges. "Willow," he whispered, her name a talisman against the encroaching darkness. "Willow, I'm sorry." Then the darkness took him. Consciousness returned in fragments, pain, voices, movement that sent fresh agony through his body. Then darkness again. When Levi finally opened his eyes, he found himself lying on a bed, a lantern burning low nearby. His side was bandaged, the pain dulled to a persistent throb. It took him a moment to recognize his surroundings. He was in the back room of Doc Sullivan's office in San Bernardino. "Welcome back," a familiar voice said softly. Levi turned his head to see Willow sitting beside the bed, her face pale with exhaustion, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying. "Willow," he managed, his voice a rasp. "What happened?" "You were shot," she said, reaching for a cup of water and helping him take a sip. "Reynolds and the others brought you back to town. Doc Sullivan removed the bullet, and I've been helping with your care. The rustlers, 3 dead, 2 captured. 1 escaped." Willow set the cup aside. "It's over, Levi. They won't be troubling the ranches anymore." Levi tried to shift position and immediately regretted it, pain flaring in his side. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," Willow replied honestly. "The bullet missed your vital organs, thank God, but you lost a lot of blood. You'll need time to heal. Weeks, maybe longer." "The ranch will still be there when you're well," she interrupted firmly. "Reynolds has arranged for one of the RRR hands to check on it regularly, make sure everything's secure." Levi reached for her hand, needing the contact, the reassurance of her presence. "How long have I been here?" 3 days, Willow said, her fingers tightening around his. "You've been in and out of consciousness." "There was." She hesitated, her voice breaking slightly. "There was a time when we weren't sure you'd make it." The fear in her eyes, the evidence of tears shed for him, made Levi's heart ache in a way that had nothing to do with his physical wound. "I'm sorry," he said softly, "for putting you through that." Willow shook her head. "Don't apologize for being brave, for doing what needed to be done. Just don't leave me, Levi, not when we're just beginning." "Never," he promised, though they both knew it was a promise that could be broken by forces beyond their control. "I'm not going anywhere." Recovery was slow and frustrating. Levi chafed at the confinement, the weakness that kept him bedridden for days, then restricted to short walks for weeks after. But Willow was there, steady and patient, tending his wound, encouraging him when frustration threatened to overwhelm him, reminding him that each day brought him closer to strength. They moved him to the room above the apothecary once he was stable enough, the same room where he had recuperated from his cracked rib months earlier. This time, though, the care was more intimate, the bond between patient and healer deepened by love and shared dreams. One evening, as winter gave way to the first tentative signs of spring, Levi sat by the window, watching the sunset paint the sky. He was stronger now, able to move about with only occasional twinges of pain, though he tired more quickly than he liked. "Penny's getting restless," Willow remarked as she entered the room with a tray of supper. "I walked her this morning, but she clearly misses her master." Levi smiled. "I miss her too, and the open air and work that doesn't involve sitting still for hours." "Doc Sullivan says you can start riding again in another week or so if you're careful," Willow said, setting the tray on the small table. "Short distances at first, meaning I can finally get back to the ranch," Levi said, unable to keep the eagerness from his voice. Willow hesitated, arranging the plates with more care than necessary. "About that," she said finally, "I've been thinking." "What about?" Levi asked, sensing her nervousness. "About the apothecary," she replied, not meeting his eyes. "About the ranch, about us." Levi crossed to her, taking her hands in his. "Tell me." Willow looked up then, her green eyes serious. "I love my work here, the people I help. But these past weeks, taking care of you, being away from the shop for long stretches, it's made me realize that the work will always be there in some form. But the life we want to build together, that's what matters most to me now." "What are you saying?" Levi asked, hardly daring to hope. "I'm saying that I don't want to wait for someday anymore," Willow replied, her voice growing stronger. "I'm saying that when you're well enough to go back to the ranch, I want to go with you, as your wife, if you'll still have me." Joy surged through Levi, so intense it nearly took his breath away. "If I'll still have you," he repeated, incredulous. "Willow Reed, I've wanted to make you my wife since that day at the cabin. Nothing would make me happier. But it's not ready yet," she pointed out. "The cabin still needs work, and we'll finish it together," Levi interrupted, pulling her into his arms. "It may not be fancy, but it will be ours, and that's all that matters." They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the small church in San Bernardino. Frank Reynolds stood as Levi's best man, and Maria, the young girl who had helped at the apothecary, was Willow's attendant. The town turned out in force Willow's patients, the men from the Triple R, shopkeepers and townspeople who had come to know and respect them both. As Levi spoke his vows, looking into Willow's eyes, he marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment. From a chance meeting born of pain and necessity to a love that had healed more than just his physical wounds. "I, Levi Westwood, take you, Willow Reed, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice steady despite the emotion welling within him. "To have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death do us part." Willow's voice was clear and sure as she repeated the same words, her hands warm in his, her eyes shining with tears of joy. When the reverend pronounced them husband and wife, the cheers and applause that filled the church were a testament to the place they had made for themselves in this community. The first weeks of marriage were a whirlwind of activity. Willow sold the apothecary to a young woman from Tucson who had trained with a doctor there, ensuring that San Bernardino would not be without a healer. She kept some of her equipment and supplies, planning to continue her work on a smaller scale from the ranch. Levi, fully recovered by now, divided his time between final duties at the Triple R and improvements to their cabin. With Reynolds's help, he acquired a small herd 20 head of good cattle to start, with plans to expand as their means allowed. And finally, on a warm day in late April, they moved into their home. The cabin was transformed, the roof sound, the windows tight against the elements, the fireplace drawing properly. Willow's herbs hung from the rafters, her books lined newly built shelves, her personal touches visible in every corner. Outside, the corral held Penny and Willow's mare, now theirs outright. A small vegetable garden had been planted near the cabin, and Willow's herb garden flourished in a sunny spot by the creek. The cattle grazed contentedly in the meadow, the beginning of what Levi hoped would one day be a prosperous ranch. That evening, they sat on the porch they had built together, watching as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson. Willow leaned against Levi's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them content in a way neither had experienced before. "Happy?" Levi asked softly, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "Completely," Willow replied, her hand finding his. "This is everything I never knew I wanted until I met you." "It's just the beginning," Levi promised. "We have a lifetime ahead of us." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, they sat in comfortable silence. Two people who had found in each other not just love, but home, a place of belonging after years of searching. In the years that followed, the Westwood Ranch grew and prospered. The herd expanded, the land yielded good grazing and crops, and the cabin was enlarged to accommodate their growing family. Willow continued her healing work, becoming known throughout the region for her skill with herbs and medicines. Levi established himself as a respected rancher, his advice sought by newcomers to the area. Their first child, a son they named James, arrived a year after their marriage. He was followed 2 years later by a daughter, Elizabeth, who had her mother's green eyes and her father's determined spirit. 3 years after that came another son, Michael, completing their family. There were challenges, of course. Drought years when the creek ran low and the grass withered. A harsh winter that claimed part of the herd. Times when money was tight and the future seemed uncertain. But through it all, they faced each challenge together, their bond only strengthening with each obstacle overcome. And sometimes, when the day's work was done and the children were asleep, Levi and Willow would sit on their porch, much as they had that first evening, marveling at the life they had built together. "You ever regret it?" Levi asked one such evening, 20 years into their marriage. "Leaving the apothecary, Boston, the life you might have had." Willow looked at him, her face lined now with the marks of years and laughter, but her green eyes as bright and clear as the day they had met. "Not for a moment," she said with absolute certainty. "Everything that came before led me here, to you, to our children, to this life. How could I regret any of it?" Levi pulled her close, overwhelmed as always by the depth of his love for this remarkable woman. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day, when I was hurt and stubborn and not at all sure I wanted your help?" Willow smiled, the memory clear despite the passage of years. "You whispered, 'It hurts,' and I told you, 'Then let me hold you till it doesn't.' You've been holding me ever since," Levi said softly. "And the pain, all of it, not just the physical hurts, it doesn't have the same power anymore, because of you. Because of us," Willow corrected him, leaning her head against his shoulder. "We healed each other, I think." As the stars appeared above their ranch, their home, Levi knew she was right. They had found in each other not just love, but healing, belonging, purpose. It was more than either of them had dared to hope for on that dusty day in San Bernardino when fate and a cracked rib had brought them together. And it was enough, more than enough, to last a lifetime.